This morning, as I've shared previous, I have a book, another children's book, kind of. It has some pictures alongside it that my wife, Rhonda, illustrated. And you will be able to get a copy of it if you want one. And if you don't, that is okay too. I'm not checking to see who's naughty and nice. It's not my job. But you can get one. But like I said to you, they're not through. One day I was talking with Rhonda actually about an idea, and my mind went back to this story. And so we put it together. And I'm going to give you a little bit of insight further, but let's just read it together for now. So it's entitled Rag Dolls. And there is the picture that Rhonda made for the front page that you can get one. So if you're ready. There was a chill in the night air. The moon peered past the clouds and over the branches of tall evergreens that reached high above the mountaintops. Sounds a little bit like around here, right? And in a house in the valley below, moonlight spilled between the curtains of an attic bedroom. It ran onto the pillow of a tiny young girl whose eyes were shut tightly. The covers on top of her moved silently up and down as she breathed, her arms folded around a wide-awake rag doll. A gentle breeze pushed past the curtains. Without waking, the girl shivered and then brought the doll tighter to her face. And as she did, the button eye on the right side of the doll's face popped forward and the thread snapped. As morning burst into the room, the girl sat up and quickly began to search through the blankets for her doll. A loud shriek brought the mother running to her daughter's room. "What is it?" she asked as she entered. And the little girl sat on the edge of the bed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Dolly's eye is gone, Mama," she sobbed. "I've been telling you that you need to let me have her for a couple days, and then I can clean her up a bit. Please?" the mother pleaded. "No, Mama, don't take her away. She needs me too much. She gets scared without me." "But honey, she needs another eye sewed on. The stuffing in her leg is starting to leak out. You got chocolate milk stains on her face, and Buster chewed some of her hair off. Please let me have her, just for a little while. I'll take good care of her, I promise." "No, Mama. We'd miss each other too much. Dolly will be okay." "Oh, honey," the mother started. But the little girl had already jumped down from the bed, ran past her mother, and was headed downstairs to get her breakfast, gripping the doll, one arm next to her side. And the mother stood in the doorway watching, shaking her head while a small smile traced her lips. That day, the sun beamed warm, and life in the backyard of the small red house for a little girl and her dolly was glorious. Bright white teacups glistened against the deep green grass as the youngster set herself and dolly down to eat a spot of imaginary lunch. The dandelions reached out eagerly with their yellow smiles to the other lunchtime guests situated around the table. Panda Bear cradled his cup, while Cottontail Rabbit leaned forward, listening to the noontime conversation. Dolly's right hand was extended outward as if to gesture for more tea, while her left sat across her leg and her head leaned lazily forward. Suddenly, an unwanted guest sprang clumsily from behind the rhododendron bushes and with a jerk snatched Dolly right out of her seat. "Buster, don't!" screamed the young girl in a panic as the sheepdog jumped and dodged playfully away from her. Stuffing flew out of the doll's arms and it floated to the ground like snowflakes. Give her back, she sobbed reaching after the dog as he bounded away. And the girl ran behind him. And when Buster scrambled into his doghouse and turned around, she grabbed down at his mouth and quickly pulled her doll away. "Mama! Mama! Mama!" Anybody heard that before? Thought so. She cried and ran into the kitchen, her voice trailing off to nothing but whimpering sounds as the screen door slowly closed behind her. "Now listen, honey," the mother said later as the girl got ready for bed. "If you'll just let me have Dolly for a little while, I can clean her up for you. I can make her just like brand new." "No. No, Mama. I couldn't let go. I just, and she burst into tears again. But then she laid the rag doll down, rolled over away from her mother, and wrapped herself in the blankets. "Say your prayers, honey. Everything will be all right," the mother said, patting the girl's shoulder with one hand and stroking her hair with the other. And then she rose silently, picked up the doll, and left the room. In a few moments, the sniffling sounds faded from the attic bedroom as the girl drifted to sleep. The house was quiet, except for the frequent hum of a sewing machine motor and the soft, gentle sound of loving hands piecing together a young girl's broken heart. It was later than usual when the girl awoke the next morning, and as she sat up in bed, she yawned big as a bear. Well, as a stuffed panda anyway. And then started to speak. "Mama," she called, I had a dream last night. I dreamed I saw Dolly, and she was..." And just then, her eyes landed on her rag doll, sitting in her red rocker at the corner of the room. Only she wasn't old and torn up anymore. She was bright and new, and her button eyes sparkled. Her yarn hair was all in place, and she wore a vibrant yellow dress with red hearts on it. "Dolly, Dolly," the girl exclaimed, tearing out of her bed and racing to the rocking chair. The mother walked into the room, and her daughter ran and buried her face in her mother's big hug with Dolly tight under her arm. "Oh, Mama, I had a dream last night. I knew you could help. It was just so hard." "I know, honey. I know," said the mother, reaching down to lift the girl and her doll up into her arms. "Sometimes, Mama," said the little girl, "sometimes it's just so hard to let go." "I know," said the mother, squeezing her daughter close. She leaned back and put her forehead against the little girl's and kissed her on the tip of her nose. "I'm going to go play now, okay, Mama?" "Okay, honey." And the mother sat down and watched as the little girl sped out of the room, Dolly's legs flopping in the air behind her. The end. Mr. Paul Johnson. So how many have seen Never Ending Story? Okay, at least half maybe or more. So one of my favorite parts in that book or story or movie, I should say, favorite but touching parts is when Rockbiter, you know who I'm talking about? Rockbiter, which is basically, that's his name in the book, but he's basically just a pile of rocks that somehow forms itself into a man, sort of, and he's called Rockbiter. But he's sitting there, and he's got these huge, and you'll have to imagine that, these massive hands that are stone, and 5 times bigger than mine. And he's looking at him, and he makes this statement, and I got this straight from the interwebs, so it has to be true. So the quote goes like this. He's looking at them and he says this: "They look like big, strong hands, don't they? I always thought that's what they were. Oh, my little friends, the little man with his racing snail, the night hob, even the stupid bat." And he continues to look at his hands. He says, "I couldn't hold on to them. The nothing pulled them right out of my hands. I failed." On December 4th, 1985, our first child was born, Ariel. And she's been here with her family now a handful of times, but not for a while. And it was about a year later that in my journal I wrote down that story. And just being honest, which is a good thing for a pastor to do. It came out of the experience of parenting, and in part kind of watching more so Rhonda with our daughter, and just trying to sift through that whole process. What can you protect for them? What can you hold on to? These big, strong hands, they don't feel so strong when you're trying to help a little human work through life and all the things that are a part of it. And you come to understand that there's moments that your ability to control or protect something or someone is kind of T-boned by the realities of life. Amen? And that's when we discover just how human we really are. So this book is kind of, or that story was kind of from that angle. And I honestly, when I started writing it, didn't know where it was going to go or what was going to happen. But it just came out. And I'm doing that because it was handwritten. It was before I used computer on almost anything. And so the end of it, and even the middle of it, was kind of news to me as I was writing it. But there's 4 things, and if you pick up the book, there's a devotional kind of section at the tail end that is also in there. So it can be handled like a dialogue. But I have 4 things that I wanted to touch on this morning very quickly as we kind of connect it back to that. When it comes to this idea of what I can control, what I can't, and what does that all mean, and what do I need to step back maybe from. So when it comes to those situations, when life T-bones, and I used that illustration that came to me this week because I was driving down Kent Des Moines Road, and right there at that intersection where the LA Fitness is, there was a T-bone accident right there. And so I was late getting home, and I was kind of reminded right there, if my day's been tough, it's not near as tough as the day those people are experiencing. But when life does that, and it relates to somebody that we love deeply, and we're trying to figure out how we invest, that's what these 4 things are about. And the first one is this: knowing why doesn't help as much as we think. Why? Why is that happening? Why did that take place? Isaiah 55:9 reads this way. I think we have that. If it's coming. Let's read this together. It's short. Would you join me? As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Those are the words that the Lord is speaking. We need to be careful. If we accept that concept in Isaiah 55:9, that God is looking at things and seeing them in a broader perspective than we can, We need to be careful when we use this phrase, and I think I've said this here before, but we use it quite a bit, and if you've said this before, that's okay. But we need to be careful when we start off with something by saying everything has a reason. Because here's the problem that I've seen, is as soon as that comes out of somebody's mouth, the next thing that accompanies that is, then what was the reason? And I know people who have spent 50 years trying to figure out the reason for something bad. And it doesn't make them better, it makes them bitter. If God's understanding is higher than ours, the reality is we're just going to have to come to grips with the fact that there's some things down here we will not understand. That's the question, is can you live with the fact, in fact, that for most things, we will not get it here. There's a part of us who's like I said, if God would just say, well, here's why I'm doing this, we think we would be better off. But I think what we lose in that transaction is the concept of trust. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. There's some things that will help. But here's the other thing is if the Apostle Paul lived in the space that I'm describing right now, then we probably need to get comfortable with not knowing. Because he says that flat out. He says, at this point, when I'm looking at it all, it's like looking through a glass darkly or through a veil or something like that. It depends on your translation. So if the Apostle Paul, he was a pretty good Christian after that Damascus Road thing. And if God didn't reveal all things to Paul, then I'm pretty sure he's not going to reveal it to Ev. But the end of what Paul talks about is he says, but there will be a day when it all becomes clear and I will understand. But we're going to have to get comfortable with the fact that not everything is going to be explained to us, and then trust that God has a plan. The second thing I have here is this, in regard to letting go, or however we're going to process that story that I just gave you. And the second one is this: which yoke is mine? Which yoke is mine? It's a question, and it kind of comes from Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. And you'll understand this. These are Jesus' words. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So we're supposed to take, the question's probably really not accurate, but the yoke that we're supposed to take on us, and there's a whole sermon you could preach from this section, and I'm not going to today, other than to say, let's look at a couple things in there very quickly. Verse 30 says, this is the last part of that section, Jesus says, "For my yoke is" what? "Easy, and my burden is" what? So some of us are spiritually very overweight right now. Because the yoke and the burden we're supposed to carry is light, but we're carrying too much. We're carrying what was not intended for us to carry. The third point I wanted to bring to you is this, is sometimes stuff happens. I think that would be a really good bumper sticker. Oh wait, somebody's already used that. Sort of. So this, earlier in the week at that gathering in Leavenworth, pastor friend used Dave Rhodes from Puyallup, 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 23. And so I'm going to borrow that from him today. It reads this way: "May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm not going to try to unpack it in the way that he did, which was really wonderful, but it took like 35 minutes or so. But what comes out in that scripture, if we're looking at it, first of all, there's a word that the Nazarene folks really like in verse 23, sanctify. And there's a lot of translations for what that means. I think a good definition is to be set apart for God's purposes. But notice some of the stuff that's in there that is associated with that. It's through the processes. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through, spirit, soul, and body. But kind of the concept that we see in what Dave elevated through this is that the sanctification through and through happens because we go through stuff. Removed from the difficulties, we don't get sanctified in the same way. We don't have a sense of understanding about a lot of things because we didn't have to go through anything. If God removed every bit of pain from our lives and every bit of suffering, it would be very difficult. And thank you again, Julie, for sharing, because as I was sitting over there, and I'm not going to ask right now, but if I did say, give a show of hands for people who have had learning challenges, there'd be a lot of hands that go up. But because she was able to stand here and say, through this, there's some things that she has learned at a depth that without those things, the joyful testimony that she shared here with tears running down her eyes, or running down her cheeks from her eyes, we don't get to hear that. And the other people who are out here around who have had to deal with different learning challenges, and they're not encouraged the way that they are because they're hearing somebody who has gone through. And in a way, I think it fits so beautifully with this, has been sanctified through those experiences, body, mind, and soul. So it's the through part that makes such a big difference. In fact, that's why Peter writes this, 1 Peter 4:13, and we don't have this, but you can write it down as the information I just gave you, 1 Peter 4:13. But he writes this, he says, "But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed." There is a connectivity that we have to Jesus. And if that connectivity is deepened through difficulty, through pain, through suffering, it can be used by him to help and encourage other people. It's true for both you and I. And it's also true for the person you wish to protect. Now here's the other side of that becomes difficult. Because some of you right now are going, okay, that's great. I'm willing to go through whatever will get me close to Jesus, but not my kids. I'm going to protect them. Not any of my loved ones. I'm going to keep them from having to go through whatever because I don't want them to be hurt. Oswald Chambers says, you only get wine from crushed grapes. And if that's true for you, it's also going to be true for your kids. He asks a question in that same devotional where that idea comes from. In fact, I think he uses that a few times. But he asks this question, would you become an amateur providence and stop someone else from, that's the phrase that I wanted to get to. He uses that several times. Would you become an amateur providence and stop someone else from the process that leads them to be closer to Jesus? Now, I know we're all confused. We're like, so should we not do anything? to stop our kids from getting in trouble, to stop them from being hurt. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you protect them from everything, all of the natural consequences of poor decisions, they don't learn to trust in God. They learn to trust in you. And there's something positive about that, and it feeds our ego, but we got to be really mindful of the fact, of not becoming an amateur providence, as Oswald Chambers says. So here's where we get to in all of this, and you saw it coming way before. I'm going to ask the worship team to go ahead and come back to the platform here. And as they're doing that, I'm just going to ask you to think on this whole process. If you need to go back in the story and even think about the dialogue with the mother and the daughter, and ask yourself, who's the mother representing in this? Who's the daughter? Who's the doll? Where does that fit into my life? And so the fourth thing here is, as I've already led into, trusting the heart of God. Trusting the heart of God. In Luke chapter 13, verse 34, again, these are Jesus' words looking at this whole city of folks that he cares a lot about. And he says these words, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Now there's a bunch of things you see in here if you look close. First of all, he loves, and he does protect. That's the gathering together. He wants to do that. And he is so patient with us as we rebel against that. And in my outline here, I'm not even going to count how many O's. But it goes 2/3, the O's, it says he's S, and then the O's go 2/3 of the way across the page. Because that's the truth, right? He's so... I was trying to get the key there. Patient with us. Standing in that position of love. Get an idea. Reuben Welch, some of you know that name. I think it was him who said this. Get an idea of how much love you think God has for us. Jesus' love always goes to something's deeper, more. Get an idea of how much patience Jesus has for us. His true level of patience is to something's deeper. How much hope he has for us. Jesus' love is at least to something's deeper than what you can think he has. The depth of everything of our God toward us is always to something's deeper than we could ever understand. Mercy, grace. So his ability to handle the things in the lives of people that we love, if his love for them is to something's deeper than we could ever imagine, then, like I said, we need to be careful in our overinvestment in protection sometimes. And we need to become more able to let go. And you've heard this before. Let go and let God step in. Knowing why isn't going to help us. Learning to step into the yoke that was meant for us is the right thing, so that we're carrying the burden that we ought to. Understanding that stuff happens and we can't stop it. And we shouldn't. in some ways. And then coming to this last one, to trust the heart of God, is where we need to end up. And so here's where I started. What do I lay down? I'm going to ask you to stand. And I'm going to open the altar here in just a moment. You can come forward if you want to and pray at any time right now. It would be appropriate. As you're processing this, as we are processing this together, if there's something that Jesus is talking to you about, and you need to come to a place of prayer and talk with him about it, you can come forward, as I said, right now. So here's the things. What do we lay down? What do we hold on to? He will give you the answers to that. What do I lay down? What do I hold on to? What do I need to receive? What do I need to let go of? There's a couple who have already come. Anybody else? I'm glad to see dads stepping out and grandpas. What will I allow to take root in me, and what should be pruned away? What voices are we giving platform to give me answers to these things? If it's a consensus thing that I call a few people, that's not a terrible thing to get input, but that's really not the voice that you want to be responding to in this whole conversation. What do I hang on to? What do I let go of? So here's the last thing that I want you to consider. Parents, and again, toward loved ones, and this deal is if you have, this struck me hard yesterday. If you are stepping into the place in someone's life that God belongs in, who is stepping into the place that you belong to in their lives? In other words, there's this space that only God can speak. It should be that way for all of us. But if we're busy filling that space, then nobody's filling the space that we belong in. And see, God's plan is to use us. But if we stepped into his shoes, so to speak, then he can't use us as the person that he created us to be. He wants to use you. He wants to use all of us to achieve his purposes in this life. But if you're busy stepping into his shoes, then he can't use you because you vacated that space that is you. It's your voice. It's your heart. It's your abilities, your relationship to other people. But you have superseded that by acting the part of God. And now he can't use you in the way that he wanted to. I know that's a hard thing to kind of pull apart. But suffice just to grab hold of it this way, is he wants to use you as you. And the you that he made you to be. That's it, period. So when you are being you, and all of the characteristics that he poured into you, he might use you to achieve a whole lot of things that he needs to, that he wants to. But you'll miss it if you're trying to play the part of God. Because that's too much. Anyone else? Let's bow our heads. I'm going to ask you as they're playing here behind me just to really let His Spirit hone in on a situation or a person and it doesn't mean that you don't love them, that you don't support them, that you don't encourage them, but that you let them grow. And in some ways, maybe let them go. God is faithful. If He doesn't catch them on the road to Damascus, He'll circle back and catch them on the road to Emmaus. Love them as hard as you can. But let them meet Jesus through the plan that He has. His faithfulness is to something deeper than you can imagine. He doesn't forget stuff like you do. Or I do. Lord, as we stand here or kneel here in this place today, my prayer is that you would just meet each heart, each mind, and speak clearly. There is a trust that we need to arrive at of letting go, and the reality is until we do that, you will not return that person or situation to us with the sanctified process that you want to apply to it. It won't be cleaned up. It won't ever become, because we're too busy protecting and shielding and Lord, I know too that there's a proper amount of that within that whole concept of the yoke. There is an aspect of that we join with you. But you're so mindful of us only having the amount of burden in that it stays easy and light. Because you parcel it out to us in your way. And your thoughts higher than ours. And your thoughts perfect. Your ways perfect. I can't think of anything about me that is perfect. But when you fill me and guide me and use me, I can come close enough to that it draws people to you, and that it loves and cares at such a better way than anything I could ever do. So if there's a person that you have laid on the hearts and minds of these that are standing or kneeling, I just pray you reveal to them exactly if there's a specific thing that they can let go of and let you take on and carry. Thank you for the blessing of your presence here today. And we just give you praise as we wrap up this service. And I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Any of those that are still kneeling, you're welcome to stay.